true justice. Show mercy and compassion to one another. The Lord is righteous. He loves justice. Love tenderly those who are socially powerless. Uphold the cause of the oppressed. Maintain the right of the afflicted and destitute. Act justly, love mercy, and walk humbly. God's law is written on the heart of every human being. Treat people with protection and care.
Welcome to another episode of Cross-Examination. I'm your host, Mark Curran, and you're listening to 88.5 FM WSFI Catholic Radio and 750 AM WNDZ Catholic Radio. We're so excited about this episode because we have a really special guest, Terry Hake. Terry Hake is a name that you may or may not know. You should know. Terry Hake is someone that is responsible for the Operation Greylord and the bringing down of corrupt lawyers and judges and police officers. And he's just a wonderful, wonderful gentleman. He's a former FBI agent, a former assistant state's attorney in the investigations division. He has a law degree from Loyola University. He has a book on the experience, Operation Greylord. And I can't recommend the book enough, the story enough. There's a movie deal. We're waiting for the movie to come out. We're hoping that the people that have the rights to that will push it a little faster because it is just such a phenomenal story and such an important story and such a story of our times right now. So, Terry, thank you so much for being here, buddy.
Mark, thank you for having me. It's truly a pleasure to be here.
So I want to just let the people know a little bit about Terry Hake. You grew up in the Chicago area.
Yes, I grew up, the first 8 years of my life, we lived in West Rogers Park. And I went to St. Henry Kindergarten there and then St. Hilary's for a couple of years, Catholic grade school. And after that, we moved to Palatine. And when we moved to Palatine, we had a farm in our backyard with cows and all that. And I went to St. Teresa grade school in Palatine. And after graduating from St. Teresa, I ended up going to public high school at Palatine High School, graduating from there. And from there, I went to Loyola University of Chicago. Actually, I spent 2 years at Marquette, then went to Loyola and graduated from Loyola. And after college, I went to Loyola Law School in Chicago for 3 years.
My wife went to Loyola Law School as well. So you were Jesuit educated for a while there, with both the undergraduate and the law school level, huh?
Yes. 4 years undergrad between Marquette and Loyola, and then 3 years of law school.
All right. So fast forward ahead, Terry Hake is now a law school graduate. And what does he decide to do with his life?
Oh, after
this is 1977 approximately.
Yes,
right?
I graduated from law school in 1977.
Right.
And I had an interest in the FBI. I had attended the recruiter's presentation at Loyola Law School, but I was offered a job with the Cook County State's Attorney's Office right out of law school. I had interned there, done an internship, and when I was offered that job, I said, well, I can't pass this up. I've got to take that rather than, go off with the FBI. So I went to work for the Cook County State's Attorney's Office in 1977.
I worked in the Cook County State's Attorney's Office as a 7-Eleven for a couple of years in the 80s. And, that for a young person just getting out of law school, going to the Cook County State's Attorney's Office where the most exciting cases in the country are being prosecuted, where you're with a whole bunch of other young people and you have all these office romances going on and they go out drinking together and the police join them. It's really, it's such a Cinderella existence, isn't it, when you first start?
Yes, Mark. So that whole atmosphere, that camaraderie, it was very difficult to say no to the job offer there. So I took the job and I worked, my first assignment was at 26 in California. And I was doing legal research on one of the big murder cases there at the time. It was a couple of murders. It was called the I-57 murders.
Right, Henry Brisbane.
Henry Brisbane, right.
And so you're working for those of you that don't know, 26 in California, obviously the largest criminal courthouse in the nation. It looks like it was built, in Roman times. It is just gorgeous architecture. The courtrooms are with marble and really fine wood and everything else are really, really a neat place to be practicing law.
So I was there for, I think, 9 months doing research on this big I-57 murder case. And then after being there for 9 months, I was transferred to the 1st Municipal District, which was my first real assignment as a trial lawyer. And in the 1st Municipal District, it's the largest division of the Circuit Court of Cook County. And in the Circuit Court of Cook County in those days, there were 325 judges.
Which building is this?
So the 1st Municipal was being run out of police headquarters. That's where our headquarters staff was for the 1st Municipal. It had all the misdemeanor courtrooms in the city of Chicago.
So not the traffic at 321 South.
No, that wasn't part of it. That was a separate division.
Okay.
So I worked at 26 in California, and then went to work at police headquarters in the misdemeanor courts. But there were 5 courts at police headquarters, and then there were about 6 to 8 spread throughout the city of Chicago in some pretty dicey neighborhoods.
Yeah, is the 1st District mostly the downtown Water Tower, Division Street, all of that, right? As well.
It was all the entire city of Chicago.
Okay.
Yeah.
But was it primarily targeted towards vice crimes? Because I remember Cooley in his book said that he worked out of the 1st District, I think, and that's where all the police officers who were assigned there were getting envelopes full of money.
Yeah. Well, he did work in the 1st Police District.
Okay.
Now, where I was assigned, Mark, was the court's 1st District.
Okay.
And as I think I mentioned, it's the largest division of the Circuit Court of Cook County.
Okay.
Today.
Yes.
And it was then also. Today, there are over 100 judges in the 1st District, the court's 1st District.
Yeah.
So when I was assigned there, I started trying cases, mostly bench trials where the judge makes the decision. And I started seeing funny things happen. I started seeing lawyers meeting with the judges in the judges' chambers behind closed doors. I saw cases that weren't being decided on the law or on the evidence presented. And you started hearing rumors, too, about how that lawyer's corrupt and might be paying the judge off. But I was young and naive and from the northwest suburbs of Cook County, and I didn't really see much going on, but except losing cases that I should not have been losing.
Yeah, I mean, getting out of law school, the judge wears the black robe, and everybody stands up when he walks into the room, and even if he's out on the golf course, you call him Your Honor and what have you, and they're intimidating figures by virtue of the role that they play. And you're a young lawyer, and I'm sure you saw judges. Judges like to have fun by dressing down young lawyers and humiliating them. Some of them do, and so in the pedigree or in the natural order of things, you're way down, and the judge is way up there.
Correct, absolutely correct. Being young and idealistic out of law school, I thought everything was on the up and up initially, but I started seeing these funny things happen and started hearing the rumors, and it just wasn't the way it was supposed to be. So eventually I was transferred back to the main criminal courthouse at 26 in California, and I was assigned to the murder, rape, and child molestation courtroom. It's called Branch 66. That courtroom is still there to this day.
Right, 1st floor, right?
Yes.
Yeah, right near where the chief judge's arraignment courtroom is.
Yes. In that courtroom, all the murders, rapes, and child molestations from the entire city of Chicago are sent there for a preliminary hearing, a hearing to determine if there's enough probable cause to hold the defendant over for trial. Well, there was a story or a rumor about that particular courtroom. And the rumor was that if the judge's bailiff, whose name was Lucius Robinson, if he sat in the jury box during one of these preliminary hearings, that was a signal to his judge, Judge Maurice Pompey, that he, Lucius, the bailiff, had received the bribe from the defense attorney, and Judge Pompey could find no probable cause to hold the defendant for trial on a murder, rape, or child molestation. The most serious cases in our criminal justice system. How many times did I see Lucius sit in the jury box during my 3 months in that courtroom? Well, I never did. However, they didn't have to go to that extreme to get the message across that the bribe was being paid. Bribes were being paid in that courtroom, no doubt in my mind. Again, I never saw the money change hands, but everything was fixed in there.
So you're listening to WSFI Catholic Radio, 88.5 FM, 750 AM WNDZ. I'm Mark Curran, your host of Cross Examination, and our guest Terry. He is synonymous with Operation Greylord, the biggest investigation of the judicial system anywhere in the nation. In American history, he is the man most responsible, beyond a doubt, for having taken down over 100 judges, lawyers, and police officers. Really great show, so don't turn the dial. How did you know that they were? You said you didn't see money passing hands.
I didn't see it. I heard the rumor. Cases, again, weren't being decided on the evidence presented in court. I recall one outrageous case in particular where this young woman was raped by her employer on the south side of Chicago. He held a gun to her head and told her she better not report this. Well, she did. She reported it. She came to court and she bravely testified, and Judge Pompey threw that case out. The defense lawyer, the biggest mistake you can make as a defense lawyer at a preliminary hearing is to not cross-examine the complaining witness or any witness. You want to get those witnesses on paper to later perhaps impeach them at a trial. Well, the defense attorney stood up and he said he had no questions of this young woman. So the only evidence on the record was her testimony that this employer raped her in this grocery store on the far south side, and held the gun to her head and then chased after her with the gun.
Yeah.
So Judge Pompey threw the case out, found no probable cause. It was just outrageous. And I remember afterwards, the deputy sheriff, who was a woman deputy sheriff in there, not Lucius, who was also a deputy sheriff and a bailiff. The woman deputy sheriff came up to me and said, "How could you let that happen?" And I so wanted to say, well, Judge Pompey fixed the case, but I, of course, couldn't.
Yeah.
But one thing I did, Mark, was I went to my supervisor in the state's attorney's office, a supervisor of that courtroom, branch 66.
Yeah.
His name was Mike Goggin. Went to Mike Goggin and I told him that I was disgusted with being a lawyer based on what I saw was happening in Judge Pompey's courtroom and based on what I had seen in the first district courts.
Is Goggin the same fellow that the Tribune did a story regarding what was going on in Markham and with some allegations of some racist behavior and what have you?
Yes, that is the same Mike Goggin.
Yeah.
He recently passed away about 2 or 3 years ago.
Until very recently, if you got a parking ticket and you didn't pay it right away, Goggins was the firm that did the work for the city to collect the monies. But you can go back into the old Tribune archives and some of the things that Goggins and some other prosecutors were doing long after Greylord at Markham, which is off of 167th and Kedzie. Really, really bad stuff.
I complained to Mike Goggin about what I thought was going on in Judge Pompey's courtroom with Lucius, the bailiff, sitting in the jury box, et cetera, et cetera. It just so happened when I made my complaint, this is December of 1979, it just so happened around that time, the FBI was starting up this federal investigation of the Cook County court system called Operation Greylord. If you read Wikipedia, it will tell you it came from the gray wigs that English judges wear.
Yeah.
Not true. It was named after a racehorse.
Okay.
They wanted, the FBI, they wanted code names given to their cases.
Right.
They had just had
Right.
Ab Scam.
Yeah.
which was Arab scam.
Right, with the congressman and the monies, the bribes that happened there.
Yeah.
The movie was made about.
Right. It's someone at FBI headquarters, when they submitted the name co-judge for what became Greylord for corrupt judges, they said, no, that's too close to what you're actually going to be doing, investigating corrupt judges. Abscam, that name turned out to be too close to what they were doing. So they said, no, find another name. So the supervisor owned racehorses, the FBI supervisor, and he looked at the daily racing form and saw this horse named Greylord, and he liked the sound of it because it sounded like Operation Overlord, which was D-Day. So that's how it got its name. But Wikipedia will tell you differently.
Yeah.
I've changed it a few times in there.
So Terry, let's go back to Goggin. And so you're this young, 27-year-old kid, and you've seen this stuff. You don't know Goggin from anybody else. Similar in the sense that judge is way up at the top. Your supervisor is also way above you, and you're taking a risk walking into this guy's office. And for those of you that didn't know Mike Goggin, big, heavy set, a little kind of gruff. What happens? What you say to him? What he says? What?
Well, he listened. I'll give Mike Goggin credit. He listened to me, and he forwarded my complaint up the chain in the state's attorney's office.
God bless him.
And it reached all the way to the elected state's attorney at that time. Bernie Carey was his name, Bernard Carey.
Right.
We find out that it reached that high because a few months later, after I complained to Goggin, the FBI is kicking off Operation Greylord in March of 1980. When they kicked it off, they had been hearing rumors for years about how corrupt the system was, the FBI had, from their criminal informants. And one case in particular offended the FBI greatly and offended my boss, Bernie Carey, greatly, was this mob hitman in 1977. He killed a Teamster union official in the union official's driveway.
Yeah.
And there were 3 witnesses to this murder.
Yeah.
And they all testified. One of the witnesses was the getaway driver who cooperated with the state. The defendant's name was Harry Alleman. He was a hitman for the Chicago mob. You can look him up. He's in Wikipedia too, I'm sure. Alleman.
He's wound up in his name in several books. The Willowbrook police officers out there, and some of the other infamous crime scenarios over the course of those years. Yeah. So Alleman had murdered this union official in 1972. The case finally went to trial in 1977, this murder case. And he took a bench trial. He wanted the judge to make the decision as to whether he was guilty or not guilty. So that's the defense, not the state, that decides whether it's going to be a jury or a bench. Right. In Illinois, it's the defense who makes that decision. It's not the state. So Alleman took a bench trial in front of the judge, Frank Wilson. Well, everybody at 26 in California, the criminal courthouse, said at the time, that's crazy. Wilson's known as a state-minded judge. He finds everybody guilty in bench trials. He rules in favor of the state. Well, Alleman knew something that the rest of the building didn't know, because Frank Wilson found him not guilty of that murder. So my boss, Bernie Carey, was outraged and made his outrage known to the press. It was a little different in those days. You could comment on things like that. Who was the chief judge back then? At that time, it was Judge Richard Fitzgerald. Chief judge of the criminal division was Richard Fitzgerald, who was a great guy and helped us out. Yeah. The chief judge of the entire system was Harry Comerford. Right. So Comerford, for those of you that don't know, big Catholic guy connected to Loyola Academy and related to everybody that I knew. So you think Comerford knew what was going on? I think everybody knew, but it was, even if you were honest, it was hard to do something about it. Yeah. We were once getting an award, though. I'll say this about Comerford. We were once getting an award from the Chicago Chamber of Commerce, the Greylord investigators. And just before the award was to be presented, Comerford left.
the luncheon. So I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah.
I didn't think too highly of that.
No,
but,
I wouldn't either. There's a fascinating twist to Judge Wilson that later happens later in life, but there's a lot that happens before that. So I want to get, if we can move, and it's hard, folks, because you got to buy the book. We're not going to be able to do it justice in an hour. Terry Hake, it's just a fascinating story. And if you know anybody that's a lawyer or wants to go to law school, not everyone is going to have this encounter what Terry did, where there's a fork in the road and you have to say, am I going to do the right thing? Even though it may cost me my career, it's going to cost me relationship with all these people. I'm going to be, persona non grata, and I'll never get to do what I wanted to do again. Or am I just going to be like everybody else and just keep silent? Nothing I can do about it. I'm just a peon state's attorney. So what happens, Terry?
So what happened then was, my boss, Bernie Carey, he's outraged by what happened with this murder fix in 1977. The FBI's outraged. So that's when the FBI decided we're going to move this thing forward by starting an undercover case. Well, it took them 2 years for things to get going. So finally, in March of '80, they bring in their first undercover agent from Detroit, David Reese. When they brought David in from Detroit, the FBI in Washington said to Chicago, hey, before you do this, you should notify certain public officials in Illinois that you're going to be introducing undercover agents into the system. Their clients are going to be lying under
Sounds like
oath.
a terrible idea.
Yeah. So, who could you trust in the state of Illinois?
Yeah.
Well, they felt they could trust my boss, Bernie Carey, and they felt they could trust the governor of the state of Illinois, Jim Thompson, who was the former U.S. attorney for the Chicago area.
Thompson was a Republican. Wasn't Carey a Republican too?
Carey was also a Republican.
Yeah. So back in the day when Cook County actually elected Republicans.
So when they told my boss, Bernie Carey, they felt they could trust him because he had complained about that Alleman fix and the fix of many other cases against his office. But mostly they probably felt they could trust Bernie Carey because he used to be an FBI agent. So when they told Carey that they were starting this up, Greylord, and bringing this agent in from Detroit, David Reese, that's when it came up that I had recently complained about the corruption in Judge Pompey's courtroom. So they decided to take a chance on me. They brought me down to the federal building in April of 1980. We had a couple meetings. They asked what I knew about what was going on. I could just tell them about some of the rumors I had heard, some of the cases I had lost that weren't decided on the evidence. So after 2 meetings, they said, well, will you do this? And I said, yes, I would do it. And they said, well, we will take you on.
So what was the decision process, your discernment, when they asked you if you would do that? Did you consider all that you're going to lose?
I did, Mark, because if you wanted to get ahead in the system and maybe someday become a judge or a successful attorney, you sure didn't do something like this, go against the system.
Yeah. Not to mention, there's a good chance that you wind up in a trunk somewhere. I mean, you're taking down what the mob had going. That was a good gig for them. And a lot of people have a lot invested in this.
Right, exactly. I mean, it was a little scary. And, here I wasn't too far out of law school, only 2.5 years at the most out of law school. And after going to law school for 3 years and studying really hard, you're throwing all that away.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, I said to the lead Greylord prosecutor, Dan Reedy, I said, what about my safety? He said, well, the guys you're dealing with don't usually resort to violence, meaning lawyers.
Yeah.
But, that's no guarantee.
Right.
But Reedy also said to me, if you do this, some of your friends might be involved in this. And I said, well, maybe your friends, Dan, but not mine.
Yeah.
So
did Reedy, did his prophecy turned true. Some people that you cared about were involved in it.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Another thing Reedy told me at the time was, if you do this, you will never practice law again in Cook County. So that was a scary thought.
Yeah. I would appreciate the honesty though, because that wound up being true.
It did pretty much be true. So after 30 some years, I went back to practice in the Cook County State's Attorney's Office.
Yeah.
And Dan Reedy and I discussed that, what he said, you will never practice law again. He said, well, I will amend that. Doing what you're doing now, working as an assistant state's attorney in Cook County in 2015, that's the only legal job you probably could successfully work at.
Terry, all these years later, I have cases down there and I represent clients, and they still think that I can pay someone and get rid of their case. And it's never going to die, it seems.
Sure.
But
sure.
So what did so the FBI wants to use you? Where did they send you first? Where do they have you doing?
Well, it was decided that I would go into Judge Wayne Olson's narcotics courtroom at 26 in California, Main Criminal Courthouse. Wayne Olson was rumored to be one of the most corrupt judges in the system. He was politically connected. He had grown up in the Berwyn area in west suburban Cook County, and been on the bench for 25 years almost by this time. And he was rumored to be one of the most corrupt. He'd got into trouble doing crazy things on the bench before, but now he was assigned to this Northside Narcotics courtroom.
So can I just stop you there for one second, Terry? So post Greylord is what I'm familiar with, having started in Cook County in the late 80s. And essentially almost everyone that became a judge, or an incredibly high percentage, owed it to either Mike Madigan or Ed Burke. Later, there were a few other players that came in to be able to help make people judges. But it certainly wasn't, you graduated at the top of your class or what have you. Who were the people down there at that time that you needed sponsorship to become a judge?
Well, he was tied into the, I think that's Morton Township, Illinois.
Okay.
He was tied into their Democratic organization out there. Wayne Olson was.
Yeah.
He actually became a magistrate judge at age 26.
Wow.
And then eventually, when the new Constitution came into effect in 1970 in Illinois, he became a full circuit judge.
Yeah.
So he'd been on the bench since 26. He was taking bribes right and left.
Yeah, I'd imagine that Rostenkowski and Ed Kelly and someone who was the former chairman of the Cook County Board, those were some of the big players that made people judges back then. Yeah,
we did charge one judge, Judge Ray Sodini. He was tied into Rostenkowski. The IRS even in
George Dunn.
Right? George Dunn.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, George Dunn was the head of the Cook County Board at that time. He was a kingmaker.
So tell us what's going on then.
So what happens is they decide that I should go to Wayne Olson's courtroom as an assistant state's attorney, a prosecutor, because they heard how corrupt he was. They'd been hearing it for years. And so I went to Olson's courtroom in 1980. And of course, I thought they'd be stuffing money into my hands the first day. Well, of course, it only works that way on television. It took me 3 months to get my first bribe in there from a criminal defense attorney named Jim Costello. And it was the first one came in. It was $100 for being a great guy. So I met Dan Reedy in a parking lot where the United Center is now. And he said, well, that's great. You're into Costello's pocket, but $100 for being a great guy isn't a bribe. Go back at it. So I started wearing my tape recorder then. And the second one came in. Here's $100. Take your girlfriend out to dinner. Well, Dan said, still not good enough. But the third one was a bribe. He gave me $50 to release a car that had been seized with narcotics in it, release it from the Chicago Police Auto Pound. So then we were off and running with Costello. he'd pay me about usually $50 to $100 to dismiss his felony narcotics cases. So he became quite friendly with Judge Olson, as it turned out. And it turns out, he tells me that he's paying Olson anywhere between $500 to $1,000 a week for referring cases to him. And when he told me this information, Dan Reedy decided, well, what you have going on back in Judge Olson's judicial chambers is a pattern of corruption. Let's bug the chambers. So we thought that would be pretty easy to get the approval to do that, because Costello's back there every Friday giving Olson the $500 to $1,000 a week for the case referral scheme, and then coming out and telling me about it for my tape recorder. Well, it was harder to get permission to bug the chambers than we thought. A judge's chambers had never been done before in the United States. And it was a very big decision for the Department of Justice in Washington and for the FBI.
So you're going into the Northern District for an eavesdropping warrant?
Right. We would have had to go before a judge in the Northern District.
Your supervisor said when you came back with all these files and you dismissed half of them for no good reason.
Well, he didn't really supervise too well, which was a good thing for us, for the FBI.
Right.
He'd sit up in his 12th floor office. The courtroom was on floor 1, and he was in the administrative building on the 12th floor. He and a couple other supervisors would sit up there all day drinking coffee.
Yeah.
So they weren't watching what was going on.
It was the Wild West back then. Folks, when I was down there in the 80s, every Friday we'd go out and get kegs of beer and bring them up to the state's attorney's office. It was on floors 12 to 15. And you'd run around and collect money. And and then everybody wind up at a bar next door, Dugan's, or Jean's, and then would go to Dugan's in Greektown.
Yeah, so he wasn't watching the shop at all, which was a great thing, as I mentioned.
Yeah.
And so we apply for this it's essentially a warrant. It's like a search warrant to bug the judge's chambers. And we figured, it'll be an easy decision. And Olson wanted to get transferred out of this narcotics court. He thought he could make more money at the Daly Center, the main civil courthouse in Chicago. And so we were up against a time clock. And so finally, we started asking permission to bug it around September 1st of 1980. Finally, the day before Thanksgiving of 1980, the FBI flew me to Washington, D.C. with Dan Reedy and the U.S. Attorney Tom Sullivan to meet with the head of the FBI, William Webster, and the chief of the criminal division, Philip Heyman. And they wanted to see who was saying this stuff about what was going on in Judge Olson's chambers. They found it very hard to believe that it was, as you termed it, Mark, the Wild, Wild West. They just could not imagine what was going on. But it was the Wild, Wild West. So after I flew out there with Dan Reedy and Tom Sullivan, I'd never been to Washington, D.C. before. It was kind of exciting. And I met with them at the Department of Justice. They decided they would bug the chambers. So they believed me. So right around Thanksgiving of 1980, 2 FBI agents walked into Judge Olson's chambers and installed the bug. We had agonized for months how we were going to do this thing. It was a holiday weekend, so all the dedicated public servants had left by 2:00 that day, and they were able to walk just right into the chambers and install the bug. And when Olson got back from a Florida vacation, we were up and running with the bug in his chambers. And we caught 10 lawyers in there bribing him. We heard about how he'd been corrupt for years. One conversation he bragged about, he received a phone call once from a lawyer to fix a case, and he got so drunk the night before the case was to be heard that he couldn't remember if he was to find the defendant guilty or not guilty. So he joked about things like that. So if you find someone guilty and you're paid off to do it, that's known as a reverse fix.
You're listening to Terry Hake. I think this is one of the most fascinating interviews anybody's ever going to hear. WSFI Catholic Radio, 88.5 FM, 750 AM, WNDZ. This is Terry Hake, the guy responsible for Greylord, that brought down what ultimately was 103 lawyers and judges and police officers. Is that right?
Yes. We charge 103.
In 103 indictments all rolled out at one moment. What I talked to you about this before, and I said, you probably just got the cream of the top. You didn't get all the people that were taking money. And, I ventured to say that probably 80% of the judges at that point in time were taking money. And because that was the culture. And I think you said, yeah, very, very true.
Yes. There were 325 judges in those days in Cook County. We had a list of 80 that we had heard rumors about that were taking bribes. So if we had heard about 80, as you just said, Mark, there were probably
some were more discreet.
Five times more than that 80.
Yeah.
Well, not 5 times, but let's say 3 times.
Yeah. So this is unbelievable that this has been the nature, I think, of Chicago and Cook County politics. People joke about Al Capone, but I submit to you, it's still, wrong what's going on down there. But this is about Greylord. So Terry, you're in Olson's. Where do they send you next?
So what happened was, I'm in Olson's courtroom, and they decide that I could be of more use resigning from the Cook County State's Attorney's Office and becoming a criminal defense lawyer. That way I could roam throughout Cook County and bribe judges, policemen, deputy sheriffs who were the bailiffs. So around February 1st of 1981, I resigned from the Cook County State's Attorney's Office and became a criminal defense attorney. Well, they also decided in Washington, D.C. that they did not want me or the other undercover agent, David Reese, fixing real criminal cases because they didn't want the government to be paying bribes to let criminals out on the street and perhaps commit murders or other criminal offenses.
Yeah.
They didn't want the government to be involved in that. So we represented undercover FBI agents who came to Chicago to commit crimes. We had agents shoplift from department stores. We had agents steal cars and get caught in stolen cars, possess narcotics, possess illegal guns. And so we represented all these FBI agents, myself and David Reese, for the next 2.5 years throughout Cook County.
The cases get assigned by the clerk. So you don't know which judge these are going in front of. You don't know essentially the prosecutor that's going to be handling the case. And yet you had all that success. It's just absolutely crazy when you think of how many things are at play, how many different factors are at play in where a criminal case winds up and who's the decision maker.
Yes. That's where I mentioned Judge Richard Fitzgerald before, the chief judge of the criminal division.
Right.
That's why he became valuable to us, because he made the judicial assignments. So we would talk to Judge Richard Fitzgerald, and he would assign our cases to corrupt judges. We didn't want honest judges.
Right.
We wanted corrupt judges, of course. So
so
we were able to
let me ask you one
maneuver that way.
Terry, what's troubling me about the way this is going down is, the mob, you don't just walk in and say, hey, I want to join you guys or what have you. Essentially any criminal enterprise is very, there's walls that you have to go through before you get to see the real players. But it seems like they just, hey, yeah, you want to give a bribe, just give it over to that guy, not even knowing the fact that maybe this guy's wearing a wire, maybe this guy's, has other intentions.
It was so open and blatant that even a young guy like me who had been a prosecutor for 3 years, I could go out there and fix cases. It was the normal course of being a lawyer, a criminal defense lawyer, to fix cases. I did have one introduction on one case But other than that, maybe one or two introductions. Well, I went to one lawyer down at Chicago Traffic Court, and I said, I'd like to bribe Judge Devine, essentially, not in those words. And the lawyer said, well, Devine, you used to work in his courtroom. Just go see him yourself. Another time I went and asked for an introduction from a lawyer. And yeah, he introduced me to this policeman who was taking bribes on behalf of his cousin who was a judge. But he warned me, he goes, you don't want to see that guy. He's a pig. He charges too much. Yeah. But I said, well, I think I need to see him, right. That kind of thing. We were very successful for 2.5 years. Reese and I were bribing judges.
Were these any really serious crimes, or were they lower level felonies?
Well, they were lower level felonies. We wanted to make sure our agents got out on bond.
Yeah.
We didn't want our FBI agents to spend the night in Cook County Jail.
Yeah.
Dan Reedy, the chief prosecutor, said, well, if any of our agents have to spend the night in Cook County Jail, the case is over. We're
right.
ending it.
I remember reading your book about Judge Lefevre, who was the head of the traffic court in Cook County. And essentially, I think that was the biggest courthouse in the world, essentially in terms of volume and everything else. I think it was 321 or 231 South.
321 North LaSalle.
321 North LaSalle. And I went there when I was back in law school, running cases over to, not bribes, but other errands into that courthouse. So what happened with Lefevre and that whole?
Well, I just mentioned wanting to meet this policeman who I was told was a pig because he charged too much. Well, that was Judge Richard Lefevre's first cousin, Jimmy Lefevre. He's a Chicago policeman. And we had heard that Lefevre had organized corruption within his division of the Circuit Court of Cook County. He had judges who were working for him. So went to see, and we also heard that his cousin, the Chicago policeman, was his administrative assistant being paid by the police department. So we said, well, what's that about? Well, we knew the answer. It was that Jimmy Lefevre was his first cousin's bagman. So I made it a point to meet Jimmy Lefevre, and he could fix cases anywhere for me in Cook County, Jimmy Lefevre, because he would go to his first cousin, the chief judge, and say, hey, we need a case fixed out in the suburbs even, in Oak Lawn, for example. So we were able, through Jimmy Lefevre, to funnel money to the Chief Judge Richard, although I never met him, never recorded him. But it didn't really matter too much because the last person we ever expected to cooperate in Operation Greylord was Jimmy Lefevre, the first cousin to the chief judge.
Yeah.
And he testified against his cousin, Richard.
Yeah.
And Richard received 12 years in federal prison.
You know what's fascinating for, I think, our listening audience, WSFI 88.5 FM Catholic Radio and WNDZ 750 AM Catholic Radio. Back in those days, and even the 80s, there were very few minorities that were involved in the criminal justice system. And virtually every one of these players grew up going to Catholic schools. And I could tell you the judges, when you came out the list of indictments, you went, oh, that guy's a Fenwick grad, that guy's a Brother Rice grad, that guy's a St. Rita grad, right on down the line. This was, Greylord was a Catholic crime, if anything. When I interviewed for a job in Cook County and I got it, that's how they got it. It was the Catholic Jeopardy. I went in there and they said, the guy walked to the back door to the Ken Malatesta, who was a St. Ignatius grad and whose kids went to Fenwick, and said, this is Curran. He played football at Loyola Academy, blah, blah, blah. And I was in.
Yeah. And Lefevre's, I think Lefevre sent he had 4 or 5 sons. He sent them all to Catholic high school in Oak Park, Fenwick.
Yeah. By the way, Malatesta was a great guy. I didn't,
Yeah, no, he was a nice guy.
Yeah.
Maybe we should tie out what happened to Harry Alleman, the mob hit.
Yeah.
Before we end here.
Right.
So we talked about how Harry Alleman was responsible for Operation Greylord starting, in part responsible. His murder fix, what we thought was fixed in 1977. Well, in 1986, an attorney named Bob Cooley, who went to Mount Carmel High School in Chicago, he became disgusted with the life he was leading as a lawyer for the Chicago mob. So he came into the U.S. Attorney's Office in Chicago.
And he was a former Chicago cop as well.
Former Chicago cop. And so Cooley comes in and says, I'm sick of this. I want to cooperate. Plus, Greylord, you're not getting the organized crime aspect in Greylord itself. I want to help you and show you how organized crime, the mafia is involved in this. So one of the first things Cooley told us when he came in to cooperate was that he was the guy who paid $10,000 to Judge Frank Wilson in 1977 to fix the Harry Alleman murder case. So we sent Cooley out to Arizona, where Wilson was then retired, and he invited Wilson out to dinner. Cooley swung the conversation over to the fix from 9 years before, and Wilson refused to talk to him and ran out of the restaurant once Cooley brought the fix up. So what happened to Wilson? Well, when Cooley's part of the case ended in about 1990, they sent the two agents out to Arizona to talk to Wilson again. He refused to talk to the FBI agents, and then about 2 weeks later, he killed himself in his backyard in the Phoenix area. So that's Harry Alleman. What happened to him? Well, he went to trial for that same murder in 1997.
Fascinating legal precedent.
Yeah, he, of course, argued, I've already been found not guilty of that, double jeopardy. And Judge Michael Tooman, who just recently died, great judge.
He's the judge that heard the police officer involved with Quan McDonald's shooting.
Yeah, and he also was involved in the Jussie Smollett case. So Tooman rules, wait a second, there was no jeopardy here. You knew you were going to be found not guilty by committing this fraud upon the court, paying the bribe. You will stand trial. So in 1997, he was found guilty of murder, Harry Alleman, and received 300 years in prison, where he died in prison before he's finished his 300 years.
Yeah, Terry, what a story. And so, Terry, you had a career with the FBI after that. The FBI is under, some type of scrutiny, if you will, right now for some of the higher ups doing things that really are hard to reconcile and what have you. Tell us, if you can, just wrapping up, we got to have you back. This has been one of the greatest shows I think that anybody out there is going to have a chance to listen to, because this guy is so famous, and not famous in the sense that, but so his integrity is so high, and he has such a compelling story. Terry, what's the book, and where can they get it?
Sure. The book is called Operation Greylord, the true story of an untrained undercover agent and America's biggest corruption bust. It's on Amazon. You can search my name, Terrence, Terrence, Hake, Hake, and it'll pop up. Or search Operation Greylord, and it should pop up on Amazon.
So, Terry, you wound up having a career with the FBI. The FBI pays nowhere near as much as lawyers get paid. And do you have any regrets? Was it a good career? What do you think looking back on it all?
Yeah, I have no regrets, Mark. Good career. I ended up retiring, not from the FBI, but from the Department of Justice Inspector General's Office, Internal Affairs for the Justice Department as an agent, and retired from there in 2008. And then I went back to work for 10 years for the Sheriff's Office in Cook County. And at the very end of my career, I went back to the Cook County State's Attorney's Office and was a prosecutor again. And so my career came full circle there.
That's great. And you're married to a great woman that was a longtime prosecutor, and you have a daughter now that's a prosecutor, and 2 daughters and a son. So was there any specific thing that you could point to in your life that prepared you, Terry Hake, to be the guy that said, I can't look away. I've got to do something?
Well, I truly think it was, the ethics my parents instilled in all of us, their children. And also, my Catholic education at St. Teresa and Palatine, and Loyola undergrad and Loyola Law School. Those were big influences as far as my future sense of ethics.
What's the scriptural verse, Angela? Many will hear, but few will listen. And you think of that all those players out there, most of those players that we just named we had Catholic schools as well, but the message fell upon deaf ears with them. So I want to finish. Let's finish in prayer. We'll call upon the intercession of St. Thomas More, patron saint of lawyers for Terry, and St. Michael, patron saint of police officers, also for Terry, and for WSFI Catholic Radio. In the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners now at the hour of our death. Amen. St. Michael, pray for us. St. Thomas More, pray for us.
Thank you, Mark.